Welcome to WORLDbytes and the very first episode of Question Dine, a unique concept which brings politicians close to the people they look to represent. The show invites politicians to dine with members of the public and seriously engage with them on issues that matter. With us this evening, we are delighted to have a selection of parliamentary candidates.
Hi, I'm Jamieson-Ball. I'm the prospective parliamentary candidate for Islington North. I've been a councillor for the past 3 years, one of the youngest on Islington Council, and some key passions of mine. I was formerly a development economics student, so international issues I care passionately about. I also care about, obviously, the economy, having nearly lost my job just over a year ago, and having just cycled here, I also care about the environment.
I'm Alex Hilton. I run a small communications business and I'm standing for Parliament in Chelsea and Fulham for the Labour Party, and I'm standing for Parliament because I think the country could be run better.
My name's Darren Kaplan. I'm the prospective parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party in Hackney North and Stoke Newington. I first got into politics in the 80s when my father tried to set up a small business, a small print business, having been working for a national newspaper, and he kind of benefited from the Thatcher reforms of low taxes, deregulation, cutting down red tape and so on. And so that for me seemed a really good reason to get involved in politics when I saw the country flourishing after the dog days in the 70s. And we have some of the same problems today, and that's why I'm passionate about politics. I think the state should be smaller and citizens should be bigger. And that's some of the things I'll be talking about at dinner tonight. So thanks for having me.
Okay, cheers.
Hi, I'm Adila. I'm a student at the moment at school, and I also volunteer here at WORLDbytes.
I'm Alex. I'm a sociology student, and recently with a group of friends I've put together an alternative election manifesto which is trying to challenge the dire state politics finds itself in today.
I'm Luke. I'm currently reading to be a barrister. I'm also a volunteer reporter here at WORLDbytes.
I'm Salaha. I'm a volunteer coordinator at WORLDwrite, and I also work for a digital agency.
And I'm Ash. I'm a politics student and I'm also looking for part-time work because as a politics student I'm pretty poor.
So one of the questions I really wanted to address you about is about 16-year-olds, young people, and their right to vote. So obviously at the moment I can't vote, being 16, but I'm also interested in a lot of political issues at the moment. So I wanted to know what you thought should be the role of young people and how you think they can participate and what role they should have in politics.
At the age of 16, you're here tonight, you're clearly an intelligent woman. I personally think you should have the right to vote. People at 16 can join the army. People at 16 can choose to have a family. If you can choose to have a family and you can choose to fight for this country, I think you deserve the right to vote. I think it's a crying shame that both the Tories and Labour just refuse to deal with that.
Are you refusing to deal with that, Alex?
I don't think so. I agree with Roger's position in that 16-year-olds should have the vote, but not on the grounds of how intelligent they are. It's not a test of intelligence whether you should vote or not. It's a test of autonomy. And society has moved a long way in the last 100 years. Nobody can tell a 16-year-old to do something that they don't want to do. The fact that they have autonomy means that they should have the vote.
I suppose if you can vote, you should get to stand for Parliament, you should be able to stand for Council. And I think 16 is probably too young to be able to have the experience required to do that. That doesn't mean to say you shouldn't get involved in politics. And when I say politics, it doesn't have to be big P politics involved with the major parties. It can be a local campaign, it can be a local issue that you're particularly passionate about, and you can get involved in that way.
Do you think 16-year-olds should be able to have a family, though?
I don't think there's a problem with that. I mean,
if you're able to bring up a family, aren't you therefore, and care for a child, which is an incredibly important thing, surely therefore you should have the right to decide who decides on which education policy that child should face?
No, it's a fair point. I mean, what age do you take on certain responsibilities? I don't see the rush for it. I don't see how the difference between 18 or 16 is a major issue.
Oh, I'll give you the reason why. We have an election once every 4 or 5 years. So on average, if the age majority is 18, on average, the first time a person gets to vote in a general election is when they're 20 or 21. When they're at school is when they're most engaged in how the world around them operates, how chemical reactions work, how different cultures operate. That whole gamut of education is a great pathway into engagement in society. Leaving it till someone's 20 before they on average get to vote in a general election.
So why has this government not done anything about it then? Why has the Labour Party just not done anything?
To be fair, Rodri, the government doesn't consult me before they do things. Any more than Nick Clegg consults you before he does things. And while I like to take credit for things that my party does that fit in with my values, I don't take credit for the things it succeeds in that I don't agree with. We're in politics, presumably, because we don't like the way things are run, not to be cheerleaders for a particular party.
Isn't there a broader problem here, though? Because, I mean, it's all very well giving 16-year-olds the right to vote, but there isn't really a drive for young people wanting to vote. I mean, young people nowadays feel completely disillusioned from politics. And don't you, as members of, the political class, take some responsibility for the fact that there's no drive amongst young people to actually want to get involved in politics?
It's just not a major priority. I'm sorry, it's not. If you look at surveys of 18 to 35-year-olds and see if they would vote or not, the vast majority of people wouldn't vote even though they have the chance to vote. So yes, there's a principle at stake here, and I accept it, and it's worth having an argument about it. But in reality, the amount of effort, time, resources that we require to change it compared to some of the other problems we have today, I think are disproportionate. And the point is, at what point does that become a priority? I don't know.
It's not consistent.
But it's not a priority.
The majority of people under 25 don't vote. Are you saying you should take the vote away from them with the same logic?
No, but I'm just saying it's in terms of a practical programme of government, and you're in government, my party hopes to form a government, so does yours, it just isn't a priority. That's not what Adina wants to hear, but that is the situation. And
if there is this problem with voter disillusionment more broadly, what's the point in changing the voting age if they're not going to... If people are genuinely disengaged, it doesn't matter what age they are, they could be disillusioned and disenfranchised with the political class when they're 16, and they remain so until they're 23. What's actually going to change so young people actually want to vote?
What do your parties have to say about that in terms of actually engaging with young people in politics? Unless with age, that's kind of a technical issue. It doesn't actually redress the crux of the problem.
We've had the worst year in politics, basically almost comprehensive corruption in the House of Commons, and they seem to have got away with it. We've got an absolute culture of unaccountability, and no one really gets to choose who their MP is.
I mean, when you say there's massive corruption, I think probably on the grand scale of things, not to defend how MPs behave, but that's not a priority. MPs, I mean, fiddling their expenses, I mean, most people fiddle their expenses in many realms of life, and I don't think that's a major political issue. I want to hold my MPs to account because of their politics. It's not the
I completely disagree with that. I can't believe you can just so be blasé with something such that. It's an indication of a person's character. MPs represent us as the public and as people, and they have to have a certain kind of character to be able to do that job effectively. If they're fiddling their expenses, they're fiddling our expenses because it's our money paying for them. So if they're doing that, then it's systemic of how they treat the job and how they view their job and their position
in a sense,
and their
they're both
role.
right. If you've got an MP, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, not giving a toss what their voters think when they're filling in their expenses form, the bigger scandal is in fact that 2 hours later they're legislating and they still don't give a toss what their voters think.
I consider myself to be a politically interested person. I pay attention to what's happening more or less in House of Commons and so on. But I do not really care at all who spent what on what, whether someone's bought a duck house or not. I don't care. I mean, I'd rather they not be, fiddling their expenses. But at the end of the day, I want to hold them to account because of their politics, not for their personal behaviour.
Fair enough,
I'm not electing someone of good character. I want to vote for someone because they represent me and my concerns and my interests, not
That's
because
fair
they're a
enough,
good guy.
but obviously, I think that you're missing the point. The MPs, the whole scandal is an example of a much wider issue. In fact, that they're not representing you properly. They thought they could get away with it because they were in their own bubble, and they didn't look outside of that fact. They were career politicians who, from after university, they graduate, they become researchers. They work in the party machine, then they go into junior assistants and MPs and stuff. They don't know anything outside of that kind of political life and career, and can't best represent the public and their interests.
I don't agree with that, actually. I don't agree with that. I think a lot of people who come into politics may have a limited background, but you've got to judge them about what they're going to do when they come in. I mean, I say that I work in communications, I think Alex works in communications. Doesn't mean we can't be MPs just because we haven't been a doctor or a nurse or a teacher. How do we get people engaged in politics, not just at a young age, but generally? One is to make sure that obviously it's cleaned up, people know what they're doing. But I don't think it's any much particularly worse now than it has been historically. I'm 36 years old, and I've never known people say, "Oh, aren't politicians doing a great job?" And aren't they really, they're not corrupt at all. All my life, people have complained about the politicians they have. So there's a deal that has to be struck here, which is the politicians have to be clean. But the other part of the deal is the electorate. They've got to go out and vote. They can't say, "Oh, the politicians aren't good enough, so we're not going to go and vote." If you don't vote, you can't criticise, you can't complain. All politicians are asking is once every 4 years, In Labour's case currently, once every 5 years to go and put a cross in a ballot box.
So that's.
Well, hang on.
Let me say this, you can't just blame the politicians.
I want to know, why should we vote?
Well, that's what we. Yeah, I mean that's what we would stand for. The argument is that we lay out our plans as governments, as individual parliamentary candidates, and you've got to go for the vision you mostly have.
I'm sorry, but that's so duplicitous. The fact is that we've got this stagnant political system. We need market reforms in democracy, basically. We need old crap parties to be able to die and new good parties to be able to emerge, because we're not at all responsive to the public.
We have to work with the system we have, Alex, and this is what we have. And
No, they do. The public has to work in the system we have.
You can change the system. This country's crazy that it doesn't have a written constitution. It's one of the few democracies in the West that doesn't have any form of proportional representation. And also, I think it's the only Western democracy that has an entirely appointed upper chamber that is just filled with party hacks. And I've got no problem with an upper chamber being full of those people, but they should well be elected by people in this country.
I was actually going to say, can we actually talk about an issue, because that was like my question before, why should we vote? And I believe in open borders, and I believe for people to be able to move freely around the world for whatever reason they want to move, without any of the restrictions that we currently have in place in terms of immigration controls, for example. I think that immigration controls are actually quite racist, and I think they're inhumane because they categorise people into legal and illegal, into victims or deserving and undeserving, into useful and unuseful. And for me, to use that as a criteria to judge where people can live in the world is completely insane and beyond understanding. I think, let's take the current immigration points-based system as an example, right? What it boils down to saying, I think, is we're rich, you're poor, and you stay over there. That's what it says. There's quite a trend amongst all the political parties, actually, to point the finger of blame at the BNP for racism, right? And whereas it's the Labour government at the moment who's deporting people and who's scapegoating people for things that go wrong in Britain, all sorts of things. So what would you say about immigration? Because I'd be quite uncomfortable voting for someone who I think dehumanises people in that way.
I mean, I think our current immigration system is a complete failure. I mean, it's an absolute myth. I mean, both Labour and Tories.
But are you in favour of the freedom of movement of all people?
I'm not sure I'd go quite as far as completely.
So I don't want to know.
I don't think our current system works. I think the way that people get deported. I mean, people are being locked. Kids, children, the age of 3, the age of 5, are being locked up.
Yeah, but
and it's absolutely disgusting just to chuck them out of this country. When
it's fine to lock up adults and and economic migrants. It's fine to lock them up and ship them out, but it's not.
No, I don't actually think that we should be locking up even the economic migrants or something like that. I think
my point is the idea that there are some people in this world, right, who can exist in this country and be deemed illegal, whether they're refugees, whether they're just people, because it's a human impulse, right? An aspirational desire to have a better life. We all have that. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And for some people to be deemed illegal for that purpose, I think is insane.
My case is basically based purely on pragmatism, which I have no problem with immigration. I have no problem with people coming to the country, coming out of the country, doesn't matter where they come from, what they do. But I do think there's a practical issue that you have so many people that the local public services can't cope with it. Now, Labour and Conservatives have got a fairly similar policy, which is if people can actually benefit from the economics of the country, so that our economy benefits from certain people who have certain skills and certain jobs, then that is the criteria. And in an ideal situation, you could say anyone can come in, but that isn't the ideal situation. Again, I come back to what I said right at the start. We live in a practical world, and in a practical world, you can't have unlimited borders. That's number one. The second thing is wanting to do with another issue of terrorism and all the rest of it. You can't just have open borders without checks. You've got to see where people are coming from.
There's no reason the state should be able to keep tabs on us, whether we're crossing borders or whether we're moving from Liverpool to London. It really doesn't matter with regard to public services. What does it matter whether they're immigrants or they were born here? Britain's coped with a growing population in the past, and in fact,
but we're not against. We're not saying we're against immigration. We're talking about the practical numbers.
If you take that logic, why not limit? Have a one-child policy as they had in China. That's a growing population. If you don't care whether they're indigenous, so to speak, or foreign, then why not limit population growth?
That's the main issue. There's the issue.
That's not the point.
No, it is
That's
the point.
not, no, that's not the point.
Are you
Issue
arguing for no limits whatsoever?
Yeah, completely.
What?
And this thing with the resources issue, I mean, you talk about immigration as though they come here and just eat off things. You know,
Well, this
without
is-
doing
That's not fair.
This is
You know most Tory voters are Daily Mail readers who
Not at all.
don't like
Not at
immigrants.
all.
Come on, you're not...
All our parties have voters from across the spectrum, and that's what we go out for. And I think it's very wrong to say a whole party
But look,
is
actually,
kind of discriminatory or
I don't-
racist in some ways.
You have to say, whenever you meet a nice Tory, it's,
You know they're retarded.
well, you don't hate women, you don't hate brown people, you don't hate gays.
Oh, here we go.
What did you tick on the application form?
Here we go.
The fact is that you do have institutional bigotry.
The real
Sorry,
problem
Gareth.
here is that there is no ideological dispute on immigration amongst the political class. What is the dividing line? I mean, Rodri, you turn around to Darren and say, you know, you accuse him of a number of, you know, racist ideas or whatever, and you then say
that.
So are you going to defend open borders or not? 22 of this country's Nobel Prize winners not only were economic migrants, but they wouldn't have got into this country under the current points-based system. Anyone who defends the points-based system has to tell us how it can measure an individual's contribution to this country. And do you think you can do that?
I don't want to defend the points-based system. I think
Yeah,
it's
but
failed.
you're
I
still
think the
defending
current...
the idea
So on what
of
basis are you going to
immigration
maintain
controls.
immigration controls then? I mean, how are you going to assess someone's worth to this country or not? Because you've got to decide on some criteria. In my opinion, as Sal has already pointed out, you're categorising people, which is not only inhumane, but is also stupid. I mean, there's no basis on which you're going to decide that. And in fact, you're also treating people purely as kind of drained on resources, as Darren has
No, I haven't
painted them.
no,
Because ultimately,
that's an unfair characterisation.
if there's a problem with public services, it's a problem with the political leadership of this country, which has failed to provide. It's nothing to do with migrants. If you say you've got no problem with immigrants, then open the borders and let's resolve the issues with public services. Build more houses. There's not even enough houses being built to replenish the existing stock. Never mind cater for new immigrants or whatever. So I think that's the real problem. It's something to do with immigrants, and in fact that is just a distraction.
There's actually a bigger immigration problem in this country, and it's called people moving to the southeast from the north and other areas and putting pressure, and Wales, yes, from Wales. I did move from Wales. I am a migrant to London, I have to admit that.
Would you have gotten a points-based system?
Would I have gotten a points? No, well, I actually applied to university here when I first joined, so I'd hope I'd get on the points-based system, but I don't really want points-based.
Well, in fact, many students from parts of the third world are unable to come and study here purely because they want to have a good education and are unable to do that because of the current immigration
All
rules.
I'm saying is that human beings,
that's a
what's
disgrace.
wrong with having a desire to have a better life?
You have to have a system. No system's perfect. Alex's party, my party, Roger's party are all trying to find ways of doing it, but none of us have your solution.
There are about 150,000 people in marginal seats that largely read the Daily Mail who make the difference between one party being in a government and another party being in government. And immigration policy through all three parties, I'm sorry, Rodri, is very largely to do with pandering to that very small minority of people. And it's...
I'm sorry, I completely disagree with that. Effectively, you get off very, very easily by referring to this Daily Mail reading mass that you seem really obsessed with in the Labour Party. And what I'm going to say to you is, look, when Nick Griffin appeared on Question Dine, the most striking thing about the programme for me was not his opinions, but actually the way that Jack Straw was completely unable to provide any ideological opposition to his perspective. It became a completely technical discussion on how many immigrants you would let into the country. So rather than sit there and accuse Darren of pandering to the Daily Mail masses, why aren't you providing an ideological opposition?
I'm telling you, it's the political class that is pandering to the Daily Mail readers. It is not because they read the Daily Mail, it's because the majority of those people that make the difference between one party and another party, being, you know, swing voters in marginal seats.
So do you agree with Sally that they should open borders?
What?
Say yes.
Broadly, yes. the fact is that it's an aspiration that we ought to be working towards. Let's put it this way: we're rich. We're really rich. And we're really rich because we spent hundreds of years raping the rest of the world. Now, the vast majority of refugees in the world are still living in extremely poor conditions in very poor places in the world.
Britain's a great country with a great heritage and a great tradition and a great history. I totally disagree with your characterisation of our country.
We got rich, and what do we do with that? Now, it's possible that we have a responsibility. People have known the state of Haiti for decades. And yet, it's something like this has to happen. 200,000 people have to die.
Actually, yeah, no, I've been doing some thinking about that. Obviously, a horrible situation. Instead of handing essentially the resources over to the Haitian a lot of it has been dominated by international organisations and NGOs who are so concerned about the security situation, which I've heard from other reports that it's actually not, not that severe, and that instances of looting and everything have really been trumped up by the media looking for a sort of sensational story. And I think even worse than that is that people are now calling for a sort of setting up of a UN protectorate in Haiti, because clearly, supposedly, the events show that Haitians can't, take care of themselves. I think that's really concerning, and it might, rob the Haitians of their control over their own destiny.
Over Burma, when they had all the devastation a few years ago, there's a lot of calls for people almost to send in the military to get aid to survivors of the typhoon there. So it's quite interesting. I mean, it's always difficult. Do you hand it over to the people on the ground, or do you let them, or do you just go and impose it? And I think what the question has to be, it has to be very practical, I think, in something like this. Who's best placed to save as many lives as possible has to be the first priority with anything.
Do you think it's right that the US has dominated so much over the whole proceedings of helping Haiti out?
I don't think they should impose a government on once the aid situation's been dealt with, but the initial saving lives, setting up camps, making sure things like that happen, I do think we've got to save lives. I think that's where the basis has to come from. I don't think we should, as a result of this, start dictating to the Haitians how they run their country.
You're saying strictly in the long term, no political interference should sort of be parasitic on our help that we give to Haitians now, and you completely reject any intervention in regards to the Haitian political situation after the repercussions of the earthquake have passed.
I think, we've got to give a helping hand, obviously, and if they want to set up a new democracy, if they want to set up new administrations, then we should certainly be going there and giving them. But I don't believe we should be going in and forcing a government on them that's in a Western style situation. I think they have the right to self-determination. I think the Haitian people should decide their destiny.
I think the problem is more subtle than that. When we give people aid, to what extent, when we give countries aid or support, to what extent are we dominating the rules that regulate their economies, for example?
It seems that the earthquake and this disaster has been taken as an opportunity by certain people to try to breach their sovereignty even further and to try to set up, a UN protectorate, which I think is really, really concerning.
We're talking about a country that used to be the largest producer of sugar in the world. It's got massive deforestation and problems in terms of its ecology. It is a basket case. It is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The current Haitian government has been working with the UN to try and help it get back on its feet. The UN provides all 50 police officers that work in Port-au-Prince.
Previously, that would have been understood as having foreign policemen patrolling your streets. That would normally be considered colonialism, or at least it would have been in the past.
There's not conspiracy going on here. For some reason, Haiti, the country, needs to take over and be responsible for.
But aren't there any concerns of how the US have completely dominated and taken over the relief effort? They came in, just marched in, held the airport,
I don't know. I don't
prevented other NGOs at the start from actually giving out aid
I
and
don't know
charities.
logistically, but when you have that kind of a situation, it's so easy to sit here and judge in that way. When you're actually out there making those decisions, you can't always believe in the worst. You have to try and believe in the best. And on this occasion, I choose to believe in the best. I think most people are trying to do what's right.
But it's ironic then that many of the NGOs supposedly helping out there, were expecting the worst and presuming the worst, and assuming that those who they were there to help were savages and looting and reckless and violent, when in fact they were just needy people in a pretty desperate situation. I think it's really disappointing. To bring it back to the context of the upcoming election, there hasn't been any debate, any serious questioning about Britain's role in interventions abroad and the two wars that are still ongoing, Iraq and Afghanistan. I personally would not vote for any party which did not seriously question those military adventures and indeed that didn't defend the sovereignty of sovereign nations abroad. Presumably you would object to, say Saudi Arabia or wherever, deciding that Britain's political system is completely illegitimate and doesn't work. There was people, still doing dodgy things with their expenses. Surely someone else has got to come in and sort us out.
Because we can't do it for ourselves.
So
it's a very good argument.
That's a really good point. And so it comes down to this. Is there a role for Britain, an interventionist role for Britain in the world or not? You know, there are people in Sierra Leone that think we're heroes. In Red Kurdish Regional Autonomous Area of Iraq, they have an Anne Clwyd Day, a national holiday to celebrate a Welsh MP.
But isn't that actually quite a depressing fact? That effectively these people are celebrating the fact that they have subordinated themselves to foreign rule. I mean, you said that they're in this situation because of us. So effectively, your solution is more interference.
No matter how bad the situation is, there's something that can't be made worse with, with Western intervention.
I just don't agree with your premise. There are many instances in history where we should have intervened and where we didn't.
Back to domestic issues. My question to you guys is, what do you think about vetting, and what do you think that it hinders people's judgments? Do you think that it breaks down communities, or do you think that it actually helps society in some way?
Initially, I'm really interested to find out why you're asking that question.
They changed the law now so that 16 to 18-year-olds don't need to get CRB checks, but that was one of the things that really concerned me, the fact that you're at 1 minute a vulnerable member of society and 1 minute a potential paedophile, really, and that just what it does to society, people's judgments, how they change, how you react when you see a man trying to help a child innocently. And I wanted if you thought that was a serious issue, I mean, if you had any concerns about that.
I think if you want to be a volunteer, right? I mean, if you kind of want to volunteer.
Yeah, if you want to volunteer and help people, if you genuinely want to do something good for society, you're thought of as a bad person.
In a local school I'm a governor at, in my own ward as a councillor, I mean, we do try and encourage adults or parents into the classroom to help people to teach. And I know the CRB check can be really off-putting for people to actually go into schools because they see its involvement with the police, its involvement with things. But on the other hand, protecting children is obviously critically important.
On what basis do you think this protects children, though? Because, I mean, I used to work with young people and children, and I think my most significant problem is that there is an assumption that you're dangerous. There is an assumption that you, when you come into contact with children, are going to pose some risk. And that doesn't seem to me to be born out of any desire to protect children. It is actually born out of a desire on behalf of the state to regulate our relationships with young people. And that, for me, is really troubling. And I also think it's troubling, Alex, that you were somehow surprised at this question. And I think that sort of speaks to a deeper disregard on behalf of politicians today, that they don't take freedom as a serious issue. They don't see this. They see it as a kind of presumption that the state should
all politicians.
I do agree with your point on sort of freedom and preventing and the trust between adults and children. I think that we have lost that in society. There's got to be some form of vetting. The problem, I think you're right though, the problem is probably gone too far.
I hate to say this because I want to think well of my government, but the government has this thing about national databases. It just does. It has the NHS database is a huge database, the DNA database, which even if you're innocent, your details remain on the database. Surveillance society, there's a whole range of things. Where the state is getting too involved in things it doesn't need to get involved in. We have a right to privacy until we do something. And the trouble with the CRB checks is that it almost assumes guilt amongst 10 million people. I have a young son. If he wants to be in a football team and someone wants to drive that into a game and back again, as long as I give permission for that person to drive into the game, there doesn't need to be a record check. The government doesn't need to get involved in that social interaction.
The problem I have with vetting is that it takes the issue of trust away from the individuals and removes it outside of their kind of sphere of influence, and it's almost the state says you're not able to kind of judge for yourself whether you're not responsible enough. You can't take account for that kind of decision making, and really you're the best person placed in a lot of instances to judge whether your child is safe with that person. They're betting kind of mums can't have a carpool or something.
I mean, the fear of crime has risen. Yet they've had more CRB chats. We've had ASBOs. We've had places people can't even hang out just to chat. We've had a whole raft of measures that criminalise people for basically doing things they're allowed to do, and that is wrong.
But I'd like to push you on your principles, really. I mean, Rodri, are you supporting the complete abolition of CRB checking, complete abolition of any vetting procedure in relation to young people working with adults?
On the CRB checks, there has to be at least some form of checks on people who are working with children. Because you get the situations where you have institutions which have a tendency to attract paedophiles, whether you like that or not, is a real unfortunate nature. The problem is that CRB check has gone far, 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 far too far. I mean, it shouldn't it's now required for volunteers to go into schools. It's required for governing bodies of governors of schools to have a CRB check, when governors of schools don't necessarily even interact with children.
That's right.
I mean, it's just gone ridiculously so far.
I don't think it's fair to paint Labour as this anti-civil liberties.
No,
it's
very fair.
We don't get credit for civil liberties for having cleaned up the police to a great extent.
Whilst in power, I think Labour have made things worse, and that's the question that hopefully a Conservative administration will have to address if they get into power.
Could one of those things that they've made worse be the economy, by any chance?
I think it's been a marked feature of discussions around the economy recently that, you know, you had on the one side the Conservative line of austerity and bringing in an age of austerity spoken by David Cameron last year. And recently Gordon Brown in the speech to the Fabian spoke a lot about aspiration. And actually it looks as though there is at least some attempt on behalf of Labour to set up the kind of opposition to the Conservatives on that line and draw some kind of dividing line between the austere approach and an approach in investment. But it seems to me at the moment that the stage of the discussion has reached is quite a technical one. Where are we going to cut? Where are we going to make cuts? What are we going to? How are we going to cut things back? And how are we going to best manage the deficit? What I'm really interested in from hearing from the people who are going to represent me is actually how you're going to use your economic policy to reflect the kind of society you want to live in. So how do you think we can repoliticise the economy? And also, how do you think your ideas on the economy shape up to the society you want to see?
That's a really difficult question.
I mean, I personally believe we should be using the economy to make it a fairer society, and the Lib Dems are going to take out everyone earning less than £10,000 out from paying tax, so you won't have to pay tax, and we're going to close the loopholes for the higher earners. That is going to make it a fairer society. It's going to mean a redistribution of wealth, and it's going to mean more pounds in the pocket for people who desperately need it.
The taxes are important, but I don't think the discussion about the economy and what society should look like it comes down exclusively down to taxation.
How much money you can spend.
It's hang on, yes.
Yeah, but what about
it's not exclusive, but spend on what?
Sorry, I think it's telling that they're having a massive discussion about tax when why is the economy failing at the moment? Was it about tax or was it about the banking price?
That wasn't the question we were asked. We were asked how would our aspirations for society be expressed through economic policy, and the only way to achieve redistribution is through a taxation system.
How would you ensure that the economy won't collapse like it has done now? Again, what economic policies are your parties putting forward to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Right. My point is that the UK economy is
because that links in with our aspirations for the economy is for it not to collapse again and for us to put on the burden.
But the fundamental answer is there's been a shift over quite a few years from the non-productive, from the productive sector of the economy to the non-productive sector of the economy.
From industry to services?
Yeah, well no, which means the public sector. I don't think it's the jobs of political parties to socially engineer or to politicise the economy.
That's exactly what political parties do.
No. I think the best thing that the governments can do with the economy is to create conditions to create conditions in which business can flourish, and the vast majority of people are employed in the private sector, thank God, and that will continue to be the case. And if you can create jobs in that sector, if you make it easier for them to trade and for them to prosper, that benefits society and it benefits the amount of money we can give to the public sector. The Conservatives have said that any new business that's set up, they won't charge any tax on any new employees that are taken on board. So if I take on 10 employees in 2 years, I won't have to pay any national insurance contributions on that. That's one commitment. We've also said that we'll bring down corporation tax on business. So for big businesses, 28p to 25p. From small businesses, 22p to 20p. And there are some serious policies there that help business. So I'm the only person out of the three of us that have come up with serious policies that help the productive sector of the economy.
Ultimately, what's happened over the past decade or more, indeed, has been an over-reliance on a financial sector, which is, in my opinion, unproductive.
What I'm interested in is drawing the ideological difference between yourselves and the Tory party, because that seemed to start happening recently. Are you for an age of investment and a productive economy which creates wealth, or are you for the Tory line, which is the age of austerity?
Right. Now, this is the whole point.
Or is there any difference?
No, this is exactly the difference. But it came to the banks collapsing. It wasn't like the banks were our mates and we were sorting them out. The banks had to be helped.
The real thing is that all parties are pretending that things will more or less go back to normal, that the city will come back to life and will act as a motor for growth for the UK.
No,
I don't think that's going to be. Hang on. I don't think that's
exactly
going to be. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I mean, do any of the parties have an industrial policy, for example?
All the parties are working on industrial policies in a way where they haven't been worked on for 20 years. What is clear from
what happened in the last 13 years?
What is clear in Westminster? I'm answering his question first. You just said what's clear is that that the future is not to have a dynamo of the economy, it's to have a diverse economy. And that's the way that we get out of future problems, is to make sure that we're not got all our eggs in one basket, in a sense. And I think that's been reflected in all the political parties' policies in different ways.
How would Labour look to do that, achieve that?
Well, I mean, it's pretty boring, but if you go into biz and talk to their new industry, new jobs team...
Business innovation skills.
Yeah, the Department of Business Innovation Skills that Lord Mandelson is Secretary of State. We had a new digital industrial policy. That was the first bit of industrial policy.
The implication of what you're saying is you've been in power for 13 years. Why are you working on a new industrial policy now?
Right. We've been in power for 13 years, and most of that time we've kept... we've avoided the big rocks in most of that time, yes? We kind of probably missed a recession in that period of time that we would have otherwise cyclically hit. The rest of the world
We only avoided a recession because of the way that China has come into the economy.
Right, this is the deepest recession since the Great Depression in the 1920s, yeah? And yet never before have we had a government that has responded to recession, not a Labour government, not a Tory government, that has responded to a recession in the way that we have. We've led a global response, and this recession, despite it being so deep, doesn't even feel as bad as the last one. We haven't got every second or third shop in Ilford High Street boarded up and to let, and we don't have the levels of house repossessions that we've had in lesser recessions. This government has responded in a way that has softened the blow as much as it could have been softened. And don't say that this government's responsible for a global recession. We're the only...
I'm talking about the UK recession, but
you had
an opportunity in your years to actually save some money, so you could have saved it for the rainy day.
But spending it on new hospitals and new schools is saving money.
But you haven't made when you've got no, you spent them without reforming them, so the money's gone in salaries.
I'm sorry, but you and I are the same age. We grew up in schools where the classrooms had holes in the roof.
But not some massive investment you so put in.
We're the only party who are willing to use the economy to actually make a fairer Britain. Labour's failed. They've increased inequality. Same did the Tories
untrue.
before.
It's actually mathematically not true.
And let's just be clear, I mean, you might not think that people aren't suffering. I nearly lost my job last year as a result of the recession, and that was bloody scary. I know lots of other people who've lost their jobs, so don't say it's hitting home, because I can tell you it is.
I think if Labour's doing so well, how come people want to get them out of office as fast as possible? We'll find on May the 6th whether that's the case, when that's the election. You judge a Conservative government after 4 years, and if they've done well, they'll get voted in, and if they don't, they won't. Labour have had 13 years, judge them on it, and we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm sorry, that's all we've got time for this evening on Question Dine. I'd like to thank my guests, Darren, Rodri and Alex, and all the young volunteers as well. And if you'd like to grill a potential parliamentary candidate, have them round for dinner or at your local cafe, then drop us a line or an email and we'll look to make that happen for you. Okay, good evening.